Stay home for Labour, isolate in solidarity. Let's get together on Zoom, see into people's bedrooms. We're all voyeurs for free. Stay home for Labour, with Crispin as your MC. Get used to the smell of your fragrant hand gel, hands like an ancient mummy. I said stay home for Labour, wave your toilet rolls in the air real quick. Have a laugh, have a sup, keep your spirits up, cause when this is all over, we've got some asses to kick. I said stay home for Labour.
The game just feels rigged all the way through, and you can't you try and quantify it, and you try and, well, it's this bit, it's that bit. Like, you know, you asked me about the bullying and harassment that I've had. I mean, for me, the stuff that I've had is considerably mild compared to stuff that I've seen other people go through. Actual, you know, counsellors and some of the things that are really public and really horrible, and nothing seems to be done about it. I've had people try to get me arrested in the party. I've had all sorts of nonsense that just seems to, it's fine. No matter who you raise it to, whether it's region, whether it's complaints committee or whatever, these things seem to be fine. And it's just, I mean, it's gotten better. It's gotten better in recent years. But I mean, there were points where it was just like, what on earth have I, why am I doing this? It was a question I regularly asked myself over these 8 years. Why am I doing it? I might look and see, okay, we've done this positive in the community. We're fighting against knife crime. We're trying to build some sense of equality and representation and all the rest of it. But when you've got this, it's just one-sided transaction all the time. The impression that I get from the structures is that they're not fair, they're not accountable. It's not, you know, it's not open and transparent. There's always some sort of caveat. You're right, but we can't say it. Well, we know what you're saying, but there's always a and it just feels like this kind of disenfranchisement is no accident. Just looking at kind of there's clear patterns, there's clear things we go, well, that person's clearly biased, and when you look and you've got people in the party that blatantly break the rules, blatantly bring us into disrepute, who seem to just get away with murder. They just seem to be, and it's quite an obvious thing if you've got a structural kind of a culture structurally where you kind of bring in certain people that are going to have a bias, that are going to maintain this. So for all the good that we do, where we might get Jeremy in as the leader, we might try and make various people account at various points, get more socialist councillors in, all these different things. But until you deal with the structures, there is nothing. I can't see anything that's going to make it remotely representative or fair.
I applied to be the PPC in my constituency, and having been fairly active over the last few years, and been a council candidate and had lots of campaigning experience, etc. I was told that the shortlisting panel had ranked the candidates in order of preference, that I was unanimously the first preference candidate. The regional office would then go away and do their due diligence checks and report back to the shortlisting panel. And it was only after the endorsement meeting, when we pushed the regional office for a response, that they told us there had been that they had uncovered some complaints against me, which I was unaware of, and to this day I don't know what those complaints were being disclosed, and that was used as the grounds to block me from standing as a PPC, and the candidate that was selected was someone who was virtually unknown in the constituency, actually a student at a local university, and it was widely shocking. And after that, the regional office said that my name was going to put forward to the NEC. However, we don't know who to the NEC it was submitted to, whether it was the officers or the NEC itself. And it happened so late in the day that we were at risk of missing the official nomination. And eventually that deadline came, and we were told that there wasn't going to be any chance of overturning the original decision by the NEC.
The Labour Party is without doubt the worst organisation I have ever dealt with. I actually had 2 complaints upheld by the Information Commissioner because they failed to acknowledge that I was the victim of wrongdoing. I did another Freedom of Information request because I wanted to check to see whether they were doing anything behind the scenes about my case. And again, they didn't respond to that Freedom of Information request. So I went to the Information Commissioner again, and he upheld my complaint again. You're banging your head against a brick wall. The staff, it was obvious that many of them were not there to help you. They were meant to smear you and make sure that you didn't get your hands on your Freedom of Information request.
These stories, there's so many of them. I have to say, when I asked people to come forward and speak, so many people said they would, and then they changed their mind because they were worried that if they said anything, it would affect their chances of being selected again or whatever, or being suspended or anything like that. This kind of climate of fear is quite unbelievable. And the other thing I think is there's a kind of humour about it, that we're all kind of laughing. We think, well, there they go again, the Labour Party, excluding someone. That's just, get a thick skin, It's quite amazing that it's come to that. I will now speak to Pamela. Are you there, Pamela?
Yeah, hi.
So you have been, you were a candidate in the last general election, but you were actually suspended in 2016, weren't you?
Yes, I have a long history of being attacked and kind of people trying to prevent me from doing anything. I was actually elected as a councillor in 2014, and I was encouraged to stand because I think nobody really knew what my political views were, and I was the director of a charity, so people kind of thought I was just, as I probably am, kind of middle-aged woman who runs a charity. But my politics have always been on the left. So in 2015, delighted that Jeremy was elected and set up Harrow for Corbyn, and that's where my problem started. So I was the first in Harrow that was suspended in 2016 in the second leadership election. And it was a completely fabricated allegation of my behaviour at a branch meeting. And luckily it was a very large branch meeting. It was about 39 people, which was large for that branch, who all were able to make statements saying what was alleged just didn't happen. So, and my union intervened, Unite, were fantastic. So I was only actually suspended for 10 days, but then lots of my comrades were also suspended, and they had to wait months and months and months to get back into the party, including my son, one of my sons. So then I was going for reselection as a councillor. And of course, by then people didn't want me to be a councillor. Right-wing councillors didn't want me to be a councillor. So they devised a scheme where the organiser for the MP would draw up his own criteria for who would become a councillor. And the organiser would write a report on your behaviour. And he wrote a report on me, which was uncomplimentary, let's say. And it was presented to me at my interview. I still managed to get through the interview somehow and get selected and increase my majority at the election. I then stood to be the parliamentary candidate for Harrow East. I did stand in 2017 actually, and it was an all-women shortlist, but the NEC decided to appoint a man instead, so I didn't get selected in 2017. They never gave an explanation for that, but So 2018, I was selected as the parliamentary candidate for Harrow East. And I was subjected to huge problems throughout the process of selection, where dirty tricks completely, I can't remember all of them, there were so many. But from the point I was selected, I then was subjected to complaint after complaint after complaint. Somebody was commissioned to write a dossier on me, and he started contacting people who work for me. I'm director of a charity, and he would contact people who work for me, asking for dirt on me to get me deselected. Luckily, I'm quite a nice boss, I think, and so most of the people told me this is what was happening and gave me that information. So the same person came to Harrow kind of looking for my son and went to a pub and threatened him. This was all kind of, this person was protected, I was told, by somebody senior in the party at the time, and I subsequently believe it to be true. I have had councillors make multiple complaints about me, and each time things would be going well in the general election, letters or articles in the press would appear that are hostile to me, accusing me of all sorts of things. The week before the general election, 2 councillors and the assembly member contributed to a hostile article against me. Nothing's ever been done to any of these people. My son was then suspended from the party during 2016. He got back in, and then he was immediately auto-excluded a week later. And we found out through doing a subject access request that senior members of the Labour Party were involved in that. They decided they didn't want him because he was left-wing. So I'm kind of, you know, I've developed a thick skin. So I've been in Guido how many times I can't remember. So the last time when I applied for the General Secretary position, you know it's coming. So again, an article appears in Guido about you. You know who's sending it. And so I was not at all surprised by Labour leaks, because I've lived Labour leaks for the last 5 years, like many other people. And I also have to say, I didn't really use social media before 2016. But the email I got suspending me, I was so shocked and upset by the suspension. I took to Twitter and I said, this has happened to me. And thousands of people came back to me, or thousands are a bit too much, but hundreds certainly, who'd been through that same experience. And I've kind of been there ever since, talking about it and being a bit of a thorn in the side. But I always try to behave very well, do my job very well, and apply and try to get through the processes. But things don't bode well for fairness in the future with what we've seen this last week. So I'm really concerned, and I don't know what we do.
Well, thank you again for sharing. Whistleblowing, we might call it. I'm going to bring in Mark McDonald. You were a candidate in the last election.
I was south,
and also you helped to defend Jeremy in a court case where he may have been excluded from being on the ballot in 2016.
Yeah, so I just, yeah, that is correct. A bit more detail to that. It wasn't actually the court case. What happened, in essence, as you all remember, after he was elected, Jeremy, in 2015, in 2016, most of the Parliamentary Labour Party resigned, all over sort of 3 or 4 days almost, or a week. Each day people were resigning. And then somebody challenged him to be the leader. And as a consequence, there was this whole discussion on the interpretation of the rules, the Labour Party rules, as to whether or not he needed the 20% of the Parliamentary Labour Party to stand again. Or did the rules say that as an incumbent, he didn't need that he just is automatically on the ticket? And I think that the plan was, in essence, that there wouldn't be enough Labour MPs to give him the 20%, so he could not stand. Therefore, he would be excluded, and he would therefore be out of the race. And it all came down to the interpretation of the rules. I am a barrister, and I was contacted by the leadership office to give a legal opinion on the interpretation of the rules, which I did, and it would become as no surprise that, in my view, he did not need the 20% of the MPs, that he was able to automatically stand again. And it all came down, I'm sure many of you will remember this, to this one day in 2016 where there was an NEC meeting, a secret ballot, to decide the interpretation of the rules, in short. And there was a lot of media coverage, and I was taken down there to present my legal opinion. Ian McNichol was obviously the chair at the time. The whole of the NEC was there, and I don't know if you know the description of the building, but it's on the top of the floor at Victoria Street. There's a large boardroom. There's a small area for public gallery, which is generally leadership staff, a few senior Labour Party staff that sit there, the NEC, and then there's a waiting area and a coffee area just outside that boardroom. And in any event, my job was to go in there and present my legal opinion. So the first thing, the hurdle that we faced, well, that surprised me, is that none of the NEC had the agenda. The agenda and the papers for the meeting were given out on the morning of that meeting when they all arrived. So nobody knew what was going to be on that agenda, or had the papers for that agenda, or saw my legal opinion. So the first point that was raised, that I should be able to come in, present my legal opinion, and to assist them in interpreting of the rules. I had to stand outside because I had to have this discussion, and they voted, and I was refused entry, so I wasn't allowed to go in. So I sat outside eventually I sat there all day, but about 4 or 5 hours into the meeting, suddenly, and the Labour Party solicitor was present, and I was talking to him and having a friendly conversation. Suddenly I hear that the Labour Party had actually instructed a senior Queen's Counsel who was in a room upstairs, who they pulled in through the back door of the meeting to give an alternative legal opinion. Nobody knew about it. It was totally done by surprise. And he walks into the room and gives this completely different alternative opinion to what I had given, albeit they couldn't really hear mine because I'd been already decided that I wasn't allowed into the meeting. So now, we got slightly organised. So 2 things happened then. First of all, those that were friendly, if I can use that word, on the NEC, we created a WhatsApp group, which is how I was alerted to the fact that suddenly this QC had just appeared. And so they said, oh my God, he's just arrived, and he's got this sort of 15-page legal opinion. So I'm sort of madly typing away saying, well, what does it say? Luckily, one of the people in the meeting had to go to the toilet, and as she went to the toilet, she came out of the meeting, she threw me the legal opinion. Now remember, we're having to decide whether or not Jeremy Corbyn should be or continue to be the leader of the Labour Party. This is the situation that we're in. So I get thrown this legal opinion. So I'm reading it as he's presenting it, and then WhatsApping questions to those on the NEC to ask him about the interpretation of the rules from his perspective. And so this is all unfolding. And that happened, and then we had to wait some time. Then Jeremy had to leave, and so Jeremy and I were sitting outside waiting while they voted to decide whether or not the interpretation of the rules was in agreement with my legal opinion, which I've got to say wasn't anything special, but it was, because I think most people also agreed that a straightforward interpretation of the rules is the incumbent stands, but it was a legal opinion nevertheless. And eventually the result came back. You'll all remember that he didn't need the 20%, and as the incumbent, he could then stand. But then there was a problem, because Everybody was celebrating, and you could hear on the top floor everybody that was crowded upstairs, downstairs in Victoria cheering. There was a load of media outside. And I think this is where, sadly, the team fell into error, because he left at that stage, but there was one more item on the agenda. And that one more item was to do with the what members were allowed to vote in his election, in the election of the leader. And I think it was, they put it to 6 months, certainly a long period, which prevented a number of members. It cut off all those recent members that had joined. And then following that, there was a legal challenge to that decision by a man called Michael Foster. And he took the party to the High Court, judicially reviewing the decision of the NEC on their interpretation of the rules. Wow. And it was at that stage that Jeremy then came in on his own side. Now, I was at the court, but I wasn't part of it because I am, in fact, a criminal barrister, not a civil barrister. They needed a civil barrister.
Your story was pretty shocking, because it sounds like the top of the party, the very top of the party, was actually trying to get rid of the leader in some kind of surreptitious way through getting some other independent advice. It's shocking. We talk about regional decisions or CLP decisions, or you know, what happened there is real evidence that the bureaucracy is trying to run the show.
I mean, what surprised me most is, as I was saying, I was sitting there talking to the solicitor, who's an independent solicitor who has his own firm, talking about the morning and my opinion or whatever, and all the time he had another barrister hidden away that nobody knew about and was brought out. And I felt that it brought my profession into disrepute as well. That, you know, that this game was being played as such. I mean, you know, he won the vote.
Yeah.
But you know, I was shocked by what was going on. It was plainly, you know, the fact that they didn't have the agenda, the fact that they didn't have any of the papers, the fact that I had to leave the room, the fact that my opinion wasn't allowed, and the fact that another opinion was brought in that was completely opposite to mine.
John?
Hi.
Yeah.
The point that Mark was making is that, I'm sorry, I'll be brief because I'm supposed to be somewhere else as well. But if you look at the figures now, I think there was some exposure that there were 11,000 members that were excluded at that point in time as well from actually taking part in the leadership ballot that eventually took place. And Jeremy and I were sort of inundated, absolutely inundated with people contacting us, asking, can you do something for me? Because people were being suspended and they weren't really sure why they were being suspended. And often the letter that they would get was, well, certainly didn't really contain what you'd call evidence. It was more of an allegation, and that was it. And that was what was extraordinary. And if you remember, some of you will remember, what we did is we set up a mechanism whereby we were trying to get people as much legal advice as fast as possible. And there's another heroine in all of this, who hasn't been mentioned, called Liz Davis. Liz Davis, the solicitor, who just helped so many people and brought people together. And even where we didn't have time to win their cases or get them to vote, it was just a matter of supporting people because people were very distressed. And we'll see what comes out of the inquiry into the leaked report and the very serious allegations that are made in that report. And of course, if they are true, it is absolutely shocking. But it does lead on to, I think, a much wider debate. Is again, if it's true what was in the report, but also from what we've heard about people who've been treated at different levels, either be the national office or the regional office or within their constituencies, it's quite clear that we need a complete and absolute review, discussion about democracy within our party. And I think we need to start that off now. I think what we need now is a absolutely thorough review, and maybe it is a matter of seeing whether or not we can get a group of independent people, people like Mark and others, that will actually sit, receive evidence and views from people about the way the party operates at the moment, how we can establish more democratic procedures, and how we can ensure that we have procedures that can guard against abuse, any forms of abuse of the system in the future. Because I think that, I don't see how anyone could resist that sort of proposal and action, because we all want to learn the lessons of what's happened in the recent period. And one of the lessons, I think, is the absolute concern there is among so many members about how they've been treated and fair treatment at every level. And to have a healthy party, you need to do this on a regular basis. And do you know, a lot of it, and I think John Lansman raised this at a meeting I couldn't, of this, one of these Wednesday nights I couldn't attend. John Lansman raised the issue of just about openness, even getting information around accounts and things like that. Openness and transparency, you know, just the sunlight of openness and transparency ensures that you can eliminate people's concerns, suspicions, and actual abuse itself. And I think that's what we need to do now, and that's one of the things I'm floating to see whether or not we can get a group of people together and we'll just listen to members' views, their ideas around the sort of reforms that could take place, and actually the changes that need to be brought in. In the meantime, I know at the moment a number of people are getting letters of suspension at the moment. It would be interesting to know what sort of scale there is on that at the moment, because all I'm getting is anecdotes. If people are receiving those and they want to drop me an email, I must probably lead in with my chin on this, and I might regret this, but if they have got letters and they want to drop me an email, what I'll try and do is at least collate that and try and get some feel about what the scale of this is, and also the direction, because sometimes there's patterns in all of this about what's going on, and it can be different. I have to say, it can be different in different regions as well. And we're not making any allegations or accusations against any members of staff or anyone in position or anything like that. That's not at the moment. All we're trying to do is find out what's going on. But also the other issue as well is if people in those situations, I have to say, actually, often they need support. I've had people who've been really distressed when they've received letters or allegations have been made against them. And whatever we think about the allegation itself, as a party, we have a duty of care to them as well. If they've been perpetrators, you know, and they're of something wrong, even still, we have some element of duty of care whilst they're being investigated, because again, you know, guilty until proven innocent until proven guilty, rather than guilty until proven otherwise. And I think we've got to try and get that sort of principle established firmly in the minds of the Labour Party. Let me just throw this other thing into it as well. This isn't all about disciplinary processes. It is about selections. It's about making sure people have a clear voice as well. And it is about accountability. And sometimes accountability comes from the flow of information and also the openness of meetings themselves. So some of our meetings that are held at the moment, certainly at the national level in private, it might well be that we suggest that some of this should go online, and there should be much more openness about those, so that people can see how decisions are taken and what factors are taken into account. Keir is a new leader, and I just think that gives a new leader coming in gives the opportunity of then listening to people's concerns and also looking at change. And I think we've got to be constructively, well, we've got to come forward, I think, with a process that can overcome some of the real concerns that people have at the moment. Finally, I know people have been upset over the recent weeks. The last week, like the way the Leach report was commented on by some within the Labour Party press office, and also the Black Lives Matter comments, and also with regard to Becky. I understand all those feelings, of course I do. But the most important thing is not to use that as a reason or excuse for leaving the party. This is our party. It belongs to the members, and we've got to ensure that in belonging to the members, we own it and it is accountable to us as well. Thanks, Crispin.
Oh, thank you, John. I'm just going to move on to another legal position here is being taken up by Mark Howell. Mark.
Yes.
That you're taking on the party for not honouring their promise to fight to win elections effectively. Or I'm sure the wording's more sophisticated than that.
Yeah. Well, it came out of reading the report, but it also came out of, the history that Mark McDonald was just talking about. The fact that as soon as Jeremy was elected, in fact, before he was elected, you could sense the determination to stop it or reverse it all the way through. So it wasn't a surprise in general that during the 2017 general election, there were people who weren't terribly keen about the thought of us winning. But it's a long step, it's a big step from that to actually, taking away some money and having a secret team and feeding out text messages and emails and controlling the digital advertising and actually physically having people in constituencies, as has become apparent actually from people who've been feeding me evidence, stopping people from coming to a marginal to help, but to go to the adjacent Labour-held seat. So, it's one thing, people on the right of the party thinking, well, it wouldn't be such a bad thing if maybe Labour didn't do so well on June the 9th in 2017. And it's another thing with this hugely concerted effort to make sure that the other party wins, that whether it's the Tories or the Lib Dems or whether it's the Scottish Nationalists or Plaid Cymru, rather than Labour. So when I read the report and I saw that there was, very specific evidence of people who were involved in that activity and money, and that they were in the London headquarters of Ergon House, I immediately thought something had to be done, because basically it had rigged the election. It's like the World Cup, where one of the team's goal is let the goals in. What would you do? You'd rerun the World Cup. So anyway, I wrote a very sort of tightly worded letter to the NEC, along with lots of other people who I know did, just before that urgent meeting that took place. I never got a reply, actually, apart from Johnny Reynolds, who is always courteous, and he sent me a proper reply, but no one else did. And anyway, we all had a sense that, some suspensions would start to happen. The terms of reference would be very specific and aimed at the right things, but that didn't happen. It was very woolly, and there were no suspensions apparently. Also there was a sense, I just sort of wondered whether Jenny Formby was being prevented from doing what she wanted to do. It seems actually that wasn't really, I'm not quite sure. She did a number of things. I'm not quite sure whether they were what she really wanted to do, but I now know from the court activity, the papers I've got, that she did specific things. Anyway, she obviously had reasons for not wanting to go on any longer. It was perhaps a bit of a surprise to the leadership that she left when she did. And so then the question was, well, you know, what do I do? So nothing's happened. Several weeks have passed. So I wrote another letter saying that I would take action in the court if something, you know, information wasn't revealed and suspensions hadn't happened within 7 days. Actually, it was more like 14 days before I issued the proceedings. And I went to see, I didn't go to see, I had a telephone hearing with a High Court judge who said that this is worthy of an on-notice hearing, a proper hearing, and it's a proper claim, and you know, that needs to go forward. So a week later, the on-notice hearing, which was also on screen like this, with 2 members of the press there, 2 senior members of head office, 4 solicitors, no, 6 solicitors, I think, and 2 barristers. So it was a very crowded meeting, and the judge, of course, and me. I offered a compromise of not everything that I'd originally asked for, which was specific disclosure of information and things to do with confidentiality and various things. 24 hours before, they hadn't done any work, really, apart from a couple of email letters. And they, in the papers that they sent to me overnight, in the middle of the night by email before the hearing, they did actually effectively comply with that compromise. But by then they'd done a lot of work. So I withdrew the application on the basis that what my compromise had been given, and I knew that there'd been suspensions. It was pretty clear you could work out at least a couple of the people who'd been suspended. And then we proceeded, the judge proceeded to deal with an application on behalf of Ian McNichol, because he's the second defendant, to be removed as a defendant. In other words, to have the case against him struck off. And Rachel Krasno, who's the QC, who also acted for the Labour Party last year, made that application, and I resisted it, and I was successful and she was unsuccessful. So he's still a defendant. And then I was given permission to elaborate the case by a date in July, which is the situation, except for there was a discussion about the report, and they wanted the report to be removed from the record, the court record, because it's unredacted, but they didn't come up with any proposals for what to cross out, which is not what that's what they should have done, but they didn't. In other words, it seemed more like a stalling type of action. And so the judge said, well, I'll remove it from the record, but you've got to say what you want redacted. And they didn't, they haven't. That was 10 days ago, nearly 2 weeks ago. So I warned them that if by yesterday they hadn't, then I would make another application, which I've done. It's an on-paper application, basically saying they haven't done it. And it's now with the judge. And that's also with the judge regarding the costs order, which was rather harsh because it was 50%. It's amazing to think that in 2 days they managed to run up £46,000 worth of costs. And the judge said that I would have to pay half. But when you look at my compromise, you realise that hardly any of those costs have been run up, and therefore it should be either very much less or nothing. So that's now being considered by the judge. And I've got informal advice of 2 barristers who've been extremely helpful on the telephone discussing things. And I've sent drafts of things, and they make comments. And they both think that I should appeal the costs order if it's not varied. So I will do that. But of course, there's no guarantee the result of an appeal. So at the moment, that 22,000 something stands. But there is a crowdfund platform up, which has been up for a week and has raised 5,000 so far. And it has to raise at least 12,500 in another 3 weeks. So there seems to be quite a good chance of that happening. and the target is obviously to raise more, because what would be ideal is to either eliminate or very much reduce that cost, and then have quite a big fund to get barristers in doing more, more of the work.
I think what you're doing is incredible, and it's great to see you. Thank you for coming on and telling us everything. David, or Osler, are you there?
Hi. Well, I was going to say, we're here tonight to discuss the question of, is the Labour Party run by bureaucrats? And I suppose the short and honest answer is yes. Now, to some extent, that's actually unavoidable. It is the largest political organisation in Western Europe, and therefore it does need somebody, it needs a corps of pen pushers to run it. It's not even just an issue at Victoria Street either. It percolates down to the local level. So I know that being the secretary of a large constituency Labour Party is probably a 2-day-a-week job, and that means that, in effect, it can only be done by somebody who doesn't have to work 5 days a week. But the problem comes when the bureaucrats stop seeing themselves as admin workers and start thinking that they have a right to take political decisions. And we saw that with the outcome of the leaked report into the last election, really, with the bureaucrats actually deliberately setting out to scupper Labour's election chances. That's scandalous.
Yeah.
And the trouble is, I think, that the left has tended to fight bureaucracy historically in bureaucratic fashion, maybe thinking that they can be the better bureaucrats. And we have to start looking at radical ideas now. I mean, I thought John's idea of making NEC meetings accessible to the public online was a good one. Perhaps we also have to start looking at making some of these positions elected positions. I mean, all the time subject to the ability of the candidates to do the job, but, an elected General Secretary, well, why not?
All right. Well, look, I'm gonna move on. Thanks a lot. Good to see you again. I hope you can stay to listen to, because we've got next. I'm going to put on Dave, another Dave. Well, Dave Levy. Are you there, Dave?
I am.
Now we had a chat earlier in the week, because you're a systems analyst. I
work in IT security and recently within risk and governance for IT systems.
And I found some of what you said quite difficult to follow, because it's so intelligent in what you're saying, and looking at the whole structure of the Labour Party and what can be done to improve the whole thing. So I'm going to play this interview that I edited with you. And I've tried to make it as simple as I can so everyone can watch it. But you have some great ideas about how we can actually change the way the Labour Party is organised and the governance.
My background has over the last 10 years been in IT security, IT risk and governance. I've said before that at the broadest level, how do we fix this? How do we fix its governance? The problem with the previous regime is the NEC weren't interested in looking under the covers. An NEC member is offering 80 and a half hours a year to hold the General Secretary accountable, and that General Secretary is providing over 15,000. How one can expect these amateurs, and I mean that in a better use of the word, to hold these people accountable without robust reporting systems, I mean, it's not possible to do. Another aspect of it is that the Risk and Audit Committee needs to take its job seriously, and we need to understand what role the member auditors are playing. That our auditors only account for accuracy and conformity to accounting standards. Many highly regulated organisations will ask their auditors to audit their financial control systems to ensure not only that they are describing how the money is being spent, but the money is being spent in accordance with the policies and controls of the organisation. And I don't think we have any confidence that that's the case. So another area that I think there's a problem is in the staff management processes, that unless they're documented and fair and supervised properly, they're a massive source of victimisation and bullying, as any trade union representative will tell you. I think that, again, we need some sort of independent external certification so everybody has confidence that the staff management process is being done, is being performed in accordance with the goals of the organisation. But we also have a series of equalities goals. So, for instance, we don't report high pay. We don't report high pay within by gender. We don't present an equalities analysis of pay in the annual report either. But all those things are recommended by transparency organisations to be done. And I've come to the conclusion that the Labour Party really needs to get itself branded by organisations like Investors in People and or A Great Place to Work. There needs to be a greater segregation of duties for various 4 stages of the disciplinary process. But the underlying principles we need to bear in mind should be innocent until proven guilty, and the right to a fair trial, both of which are guaranteed by the human rights law. Unfortunately, the Labour Party as an unincorporated association is not bound by human rights law. It's possibly another area we should change our rules for. It comes back to these questions of decency, that if people are being complained about, that they have behaved badly, then they need a fair trial, and the Labour Party seems incapable of giving it at the moment. And with respect to the disciplinary processes, the decisions of Labour Conference 2019 to implement what they call a fast track means that the decisions as to guilt are now being taken by the NEC, but the idea that the NEC should be taking these decisions when it's demonstrably proven and incapable of acting in a non-factual fashion is a road to continued failure. There are 3 additional roles within the Labour Party bureaucracy who should be given greater accountability to their jobs. And these are the head of finance, the head of compliance, and the data protection officer. One of the problems has been that the general secretary has been unaccountable and been in a position to be able to instruct others to behave in a way that is unacceptable and not accountable to their jobs. We should be considering having a suitable person qualifier, that if you stand to be an auditor, you need to be a suitable person. If you stand to be on the NCC, you need to be a suitable person, by which we try and increase the level of professional accreditation within the staff, such that at some point or other, some people are going to say, hang on, I'm a professional. I have a series of ethics commitments I've made to my professional colleagues. I can't and won't do that. The Nolan principles came out of the committee set up by Parliament after the expenses scandal, and they define a series of qualities which all public role holders need to meet. And these principles are selflessness, integrity, objectivity, accountability, openness, honesty, and leadership. Given our MPs and our councillors have to sign up to these, I think that all Labour Party role holders should as well. Adopting the Nolan principles is something that the NCC or the disciplinary process could act people against, that the staff management process could hold people to account to. But I don't think adopting Nolan in the rules would fix it. There has to be a will to behave well. It's merely a test by which we could hold those that don't want to account. Given there is all this stuff out there, all this common knowledge about how to do things well, why hasn't the Labour Party done it?
Dave, thank you very much for that. I know that was very detailed, and you're very on top of this stuff. But it did give me an insight into how there could be benchmarks and standards that the Labour Party could be using, that other companies are using. And I hadn't heard of the Nolan principles before you mentioned it.
Just take this quick opportunity to correct something was in there. So thank you very much for making the video. I state the General Secretary is supplying 15,000 hours to the party each year. That's wrong by a factor of 10. I misspoke. It's 1,500, but 1,500 hours is still very much more than the 80.5 that an NEC member will be offering.
I'm now going to move on to Gurinder, who has kindly agreed to come back on to the show. Gurinder.
Hi, Crispin. Hi.
You came on the show last week and you said that you had no access to the budget or accounts, and you'd been on the NEC for 3 months. And then John Landsman echoed what you said and said he'd had no access to the budget or accounts for 2.5 years, which was quite shocking and actually led me to think maybe the bureaucracy is running the party. From what you've heard, and especially what Dave said, do you think the NEC has the wherewithal to hold the party to account?
Yes and no. I think so. For example, everything Dave said there, I absolutely agree, except the figures. He said, I think it's 80 hours NEC members commit. I've done 5 NEC meetings, 6 dispute panels, a working group, which I worked out is about 43 hours in the last 3 months. Over the year, if it's at the same rate, it would be 172 hours. But you know, that's by the by. And I think most NEC members do spend an awful lot of time at NEC meeting. The problem is the NEC meetings, as far as I'm concerned, are not looking at the things which make up good governance. So all the things Dave talked about there, things like good reporting systems, absolutely. You know, this is a fundamental of any organisation which is structured like the NEC. You would have good reporting systems in place, mechanisms, audits, all kinds of things. Audit and risk, absolutely. You know, and an organisation like the Labour Party, you would have a function for internal audit. So you would actually audit not just financial control, but other management controls and other functions of the party as well. You should be doing that. Tomorrow, I'm on the West Midland Regional Police and Crime Board, and I'm on the Joint Audit Committee of West Midland Police and the Office of the Police and Crime Commissioner. We've got a meeting of the Joint Audit Panel, and 3/4 of that will be held in public. It will be live streamed. And the papers are already up on their website, and it's about transparency, and it's about doing things in that way. And there are some things which are private matters, which in any organisation you would have, and it's proper to do some of that in behind closed doors. Management of staff, professionalising the staffing systems, I think is absolutely right. We need the best people to do the job, and we've got them in our movement, and we need them, and they should be there to serve the party and the movement, regardless of who the leadership is. Yeah? And that's the structure we need. The Nolan principles. If you're a school governor, you will have heard of the Nolan principles. If you're a local councillor, you will have heard of the Nolan principles. And it's absolutely right that NEC members should be required to abide by that. They should know what it is. And you know what? I sit on panels for the region to do interviews, panel for the local panel of candidates in various places. And one of the questions we ask is about the Nolan principles. So people are actually required, members are required to know about the Nolan principles before they even are accepted to go on the panel of candidates. So you know, these things all matter. I think that the broader thing here for me is that, you know, we're a party of 580,000 members was a figure we were given yesterday. And you know what, sometimes things will go wrong. And things will go wrong in 2 ways. Sometimes, you know, structures will break down, or people will have disputes between each other. That's one type of thing going wrong, and you know, we can deal with that. The other things that go wrong are when people deliberately manipulate rules or are interpreting rules in a particular way for a particular purpose, and that happens as well. You know, we are a political party, and politics happens, but. And also the other thing within our party is the propensity to be nasty to each other isn't owned by the left or the right. It happened. You know, I've heard a lot. I've heard people speak today about their experiences. You know, I'm somebody who was a councillor in 2002. I was deselected in 2010. by a mix of left and right. So I've been on the end of that. I've been on the end of complaints to the regional office, to the NEC. I've been on the end of interviews. I've seen that. I know how it works, and I know what it means to individuals. You know? And also, stitch-ups are carried out by people across the spectrum. And, you know, it's wrong. From where I'm sitting, I think we need, you know, the rules should be clear, and that there should be as little left to interpretation as possible, so that they should be clear and they should be implemented and applied at all times. I think we need transparency. Yeah, transparency is absolutely important. There should be a presumption that there will be an access to information. So, you know, there should be, NEC minutes should be published. I don't see why they shouldn't be. The idea of holding, of live streaming NEC meetings, why not? I'd be in favour of that. You know, I sit on other boards and our meetings are live streamed in other places, and when that happens, it actually, you are very much aware that people are looking in, and you're very much aware in terms of your conduct and the things you're saying. The whole thing about you know, and respect to people, toward people in our dialogue, in our behaviour, in our actions is absolutely important. At the end of the day, we are part of the same party. We might disagree on some things in terms of our politics and policy issues and things, but we are part of the same movement and the same party. Accountability is really important, and we need, you know, you've got to have clear frameworks. You've got to have, you know, we need to publish our rules and our policies and our procedures. They need to be so people are absolutely aware of how things work in the party and things. And I've come across.
Sorry, can I just interrupt you a little bit here because we're running a bit late, but I've been very impressed by your willingness to discuss all this and come on here, because I did invite everyone on the NEC, and only 2 have accepted my invitation. And I know, I mean, I don't want to talk, I really don't want the factional stuff, but you are from a kind of right slate, as they call it, moderate slate, not the left-wing slate, and you've come on here and you've been very honest and open about changing things. And I'm wondering, would you consider working with John McDonald on building a framework that we could all feel safe with within the Labour Party? Would you work across factional sides?
Absolutely. I mean, look, in my CLP, my chair and secretary, we don't agree a lot on politics. You know, it's what you call their opposite side. But one thing we absolutely fundamentally agree on is the total importance of having an efficient party that sticks by the rules, that is campaigning, that is fundraising, that is respectful to each other, that's holding meetings where everybody can participate. You know, those things are across politics, I think. And already, you know, John Danchman was on last week and we agreed on things, but we've agreed on things outside of this forum as well. So yesterday at the NEC meeting, these things were raised, and John Danchman raised them as well, and I raised them as well. And the new General Secretary committed to have an early conversation on how we could progress some of these things. And I think that's really important. Can I just say one other thing? I think one of the biggest problems is and I'm sure many of you have come across it, the use of, when they say NEC delegated powers, and things are done using NEC delegated powers. But actually, you know, as NEC members, I've only been on there 3 months, but I haven't seen anything come across my radar where those powers are being used. And this is all about delegated powers, and they're delegated down to staff members to use. And I think there absolutely has to be transparency over that as well, because that phrase, you know, it certainly frightened me when I hear it. But it shouldn't do. It should be there for running an efficient party. And you know, I know within our movement, even on this call, we've got people who are running organisations, and Dave Levy there talked a lot about some of the stuff that can be put in place. And a lot of this stuff doesn't need lots of money to do it. It doesn't need conference resolution to do. You know, a diversity audit of our staff is absolutely crucial. Yeah, I called for it every time I stood for the NEC. But you know what? I came on the NEC, I found out in one of the minutes from the meeting last year that they actually do it. But I asked for it, but they can't share it. They're not going to share it with me. And that culture of secrecy doesn't give you any confidence in what's happening. And I think that we've got to break through that. And I don't think I can do my job as an NEC member. For me, this is about governance. That's why I'm on the NEC. I'm not on the NEC to drive a factional line or anything like that. I think if you put proper systems in place, then actually you take the factionalism out of a lot of that stuff. Because most people who join the Labour Party don't join the Labour Party because they want to be part of a left faction or a right faction. They join because they believe in the values of the party, and their political ideals might be more swayed one way or the other. You know? But if we get those basic things right, you would take the factionalism out of a lot of the situation, because if processes are clear and you know things are going to be reported and there will be transparency, then actually you would make decisions in the right way. It takes that element of interpreting things and manipulating things out of the situation.
Well, thank you very much again for coming on and waiting as well for so long. But you're not the last person on. So that's another NEC member. We've got Anne on the line. Anne, are you there?
Yeah, I'm here, yeah. I think listening to the discussion, it's as always, it's important to try between us all to work out where is the best place to put pressure when you're trying to bring about change, so that we don't waste energy focusing on the wrong, like the wrong place. I always sort of say, if an issue is something that an MP should be taking up, or if an issue is something that's some of the staff issues that we're discussing, you have to, I think, remember that the staff are exactly that. They're staff, and they have their own trade union representation, and they should have good terms of condition of employment. And yes, they have job descriptions, and they should do that. Of course, but that's different from the NEC and the role that the NEC has. Which I'm sure most members are aware. So the discussions jumped between a whole number of those things. And sometimes I think, yes, we'll see as the leaked report is examined, but I'm sure over the last, I've been a member of the Labour Party since the early 1980s, and have run into difficulties with party staff on a number of occasions, also run into difficulties with being deemed to be unsuitable for selection and so on. But there are different issues at different times sometimes. And for me, I think just now, just a couple of things I wanted to concentrate on. I've been on the NEC for a couple of years. I was elected as chair of the Equalities Committee in January 2019. That puts me onto the officers group, the NEC officers group, which does exercise some of those delegated powers that Gurinder referred to. It also puts me onto the NEC business board, and the business board does do fairly regular scrutiny of some of the kind of immediate financial and longer term decisions that are being made. And there will be a full financial report to the full NEC meeting in July. The meeting yesterday was an emergency meeting. I didn't agree with it being an emergency and voted against it happening, but it was agreed it was an emergency, and the emergency was to set a date for the timetable for the NEC elections. And personally, I've argued since the beginning, since March, since lockdown, that actually the responsible way for the party to deal with this was to not get involved in an internal election right now, when we didn't have clear procedures of how they would involve, of how all members would be involved, but also to recognise that many of our members are on the front line of delivering services. All our families and communities have other things on their mind. We're living through a pandemic and something we've never lived through before. And the party should be uniting behind the leader, the Keir Starmer, and the job he's doing at the dispatch box, and the same in Scotland around Richard Leonard and in Wales. And that there is no way of running an internal election for the NEC in a way which doesn't just attract tons of public attention and will detract from what the party should be doing at the moment. But I also felt that the membership, we hadn't sorted out the processes. So in answer to some of the questions on the chat, I've argued, as I say, I argued for a simple decision. I've argued it several times just to be taken to defer them for a year, and then it was off the table. People did their work and we just got on with it. That position was not won. So Yesterday, I supported the view that they should be deferred until we knew that CLPs and CLP secretaries could manage the technology. And also I've asked, and that was my view. Gurinder and I did not vote the same way in the meeting yesterday, just to answer a question that's on the chat, and Gurinder of course can explain why himself, but I felt there was not the evidence, and this has been backed up by a letter we've all received from CLP secretaries Facebook today, with CLP secretaries saying just they are not ready and confident in the technology, and we've got an indication that some CLP secretaries are resigning feeling under pressure. Now, that isn't supportive. It's not. The reality is that we should have online meetings, but we have to ensure that people are comfortable with how they work, that people are not exposed to there's young members and safeguarding issues. There are equality issues. I think that for some members, it definitely involves more people, and some, like being able to participate in this discussion is fantastic, you know, so it does involve different types of discussion. There have been policy forum discussions running over the last 2 months that have been conducted online, but we need to, I just wanted some facts, and I still haven't got the facts, so I guess that touches on some of the things people were saying about transparency. So I want to know how many party members of the 580,000 do not have access to the internet. I want to know that. So I make that decision on the NEC when we make decisions about opening up nominations, for example, or voting in an online meeting to select a candidate for the mayoral elections or for the forthcoming local government elections. I want to know how many people are excluded and if there's a way that we can make sure they are then involved. So in my CLP, it turns out, I got the figures for Scotland because I asked at the Scottish Executive, of which I'm also a member. Those figures have still not been shared with the NEC. And I think we should have had that information before the decision was taken yesterday. And I wanted also, my factual thing, the CLP that I've just moved into, I'm in the middle of moving house, 23% of the members do not have access to the internet or have not shared their email address with the party. So it'll be a bit of both. That's nearly a quarter of the membership you are immediately excluding if you have not looked at mapping that. Who is it? Why? You know, what are the issues? What can we do to make sure everybody's involved? So I'm very concerned that the decision was taken yesterday without taking into account the concerns raised by CLP secretaries, but also I just think we need the information. We need to know what the equality.
Right. Sorry, I don't want to.
So I know there's a time. I'm just
sort of trying to get back onto the issue of whether you as an NEC representative have the support that you're required to hold officers to account. Do you?
Well, I mean, I guess that's what. Sorry, I'm saying it, and I'm a bit wound up about it because I get really fed up yesterday. But I suppose that's what I'm saying is I think we need more information in order to make the appropriate decisions. We have a big responsibility, those of us that are representing the CLP section, and as Gurinder says, we're responsible for the governance of the party. So there's big decisions to be made there, but we need the information. So we need the data on the membership. We need to know why people are leaving, who they're leaving, and why. And we asked for that yesterday. I'm confident, in answer to follow that up, that we will have that information at the next NEC. We've asked for it, and I think we will get it. We do get some of the information we ask for if we ask the right questions. There has been a kind of hiatus, I would say, with the change with the leadership election running and with the last year, the 2 elections, and I think it's not, I've only been on the NEC 18 months, I guess, or nearly 2, coming up for 2 years, but I think there's scope for getting more of the information that we need in order to make the responsible and informed decisions in dialogue with the membership. I think there needs to be more of a shift to give the membership more of our place, if you like. I mean, the majority of funding for the party now comes from individual membership donations. And CLP should get more of a share of that. I see that in the chat as well. And say one of the things I have been very concerned about, and we haven't yet got the information on, is I am concerned about how the complaints procedure is operating during the pandemic. And I think there is a whole thing about how the party works, not the individual elections and things, but how do we work as a political party, all of us? How do we have a duty of care to each other as party members? This isn't only the staff issue. It's about how we all behave when we're in meetings, whether they're online or physical meetings or with people. But the distress, the additional distress that could be caused by a letter arriving saying you have been suspended, or the processes that are around the notice of investigation, I think I've asked for that to be given some consideration, and I've also asked for equality data to be run alongside the complaints procedure, because it's not monitored in a way that allows us to tell. My feeling is that there's probably a disproportionate number of older people finding they're picked up through social media for having made errors rather than anything more complicated than that, and people maybe who have additional mental health problems who are struggling.
I have one more speaker that I really need to get on. Kathy, sorry.
Hi.
We have the issue of the leaks and the report into the leaks, and we should all submit to that report. Can you tell us more?
You mean like the Martin Ford inquiry?
Yeah.
Yeah, I just wanted to encourage people to send in evidence. It needs to be succinct and evidence-based submissions to the inquiry, and it's one thing we can do to try and ensure democracy within the party. And I'm just appalled that all members did not receive an invitation to submit evidence to the inquiry. And I just urge everybody to publicise the fact that we got the deadline of 24th of July and we need to do that. And I mean, it's worth getting together with people across regions if you're a member of a region and submitting something together if you can. I think it could be quite powerful. I've got a lot of information about South East region, about selections, how corrupt selection processes, anti-democratic selection processes, how left candidates did not receive support or funding from central office, how campaigns were sabotaged in favour, as people have said tonight, people being sent to right-wing seats in order to campaign rather than campaigning for good left-wingers who were in marginal seats in 2017, like Hastings and Rye, and in Brighton. So how the central office favoured right-wing candidates grossly, and also how MPs, especially my local MP for Canterbury, how she urged people to vote Liberal Democrat in South Thanet and North Thanet. Also went on television to undermine the party. These things should be said and complained about. And okay, I am worried about the grassroots being disenfranchised, and we really have to do something about it.
The Labour Party's got so much to do to improve the way it runs things. Or I can't see how we won't lose lots of members. We have to, what Dave was saying and then what John was saying, these are standards. We should just be putting these into place and not trying to fudge it. We shouldn't be fudging this anymore. We've got to tackle this, and then everyone can feel confident that they have a chance to voice in the party, they can do stuff and not feel bullied and victimised, or have this kind of dark humour about the Labour Party being a place where everyone's picked on and never gets anywhere and it's corrupt. It can't be. How can we be a party of government if we can't settle our own affairs in our own house? So I learned a lot tonight. I hope everyone kind of enjoyed it and learnt from it. Thank you to everyone who's come on the call. Thank you to everyone who's spoken. Thank you to everyone who's spoken out.
She always was the one in those old photographs who looked like she was somehow out of place. Among the hats and looks fit for a funeral, with signs of life and laughter in her face. Her family looked at life and sighed and disapproved, but Gladys looked at life and thought that life could be improved. As a girl she'd read the lists of casualties and watch the wounded sing God Save the King, and the funeral faces frowned and sipped their cups of tea. But she preferred to hear the small birds sing. Bishops blessed the guns and said things are the way they are. But the Russian workers disagreed and said piss off to the Tsar. Russian workers disagreed and said piss off to the Tsar. Well, she knew that sometimes things are complicated and slow and clumsy like a general strike, and leaders and great men are overrated. She usually found the left was usually in the right, while others knew their station. She knew her mind instead. My great aunt Gladys voted Labour. Great aunt Gladys was a red. Great aunt Gladys voted Labour. Great aunt Gladys was a red. And she marries Arch, who's also complicated. Works as a shop steward on the post, who's there when Bergen-Belson's liberated, and comes back and slowly turns into a ghost in a bungalow in Hampshire, where the left was more or less. My great aunt Gladys voting Labour, but it built the NHS. Age did its worst to bend her bright smile double. I can still tell Hampshire from the singing of the birds. I'd helped collect the eggs laid by her chickens, holding carefully in our hands each small new perfect world. You know, if we don't push it, it won't ever start to move. My great aunt Gladys voted Labour because the world can be improved. Though the Blairs are far too frequent and the Corbyns far too few, every family somewhere's got a great aunt Gladys too.